Namaste, everyone. I want to begin by saying that everything is right here, right now, constantly. The deepest knowledge, the deepest knowingness is already part of you. Not just that, you are it. Why is it so complex? Why is it so difficult to understand? Why is it so difficult to believe? Why do we go and look for antique, old knowledge? We just rummage through the books and maybe material on YouTube or material online or every kind of stuff, and easily we got lost in this labyrinth of, they call it misinformation, they call it information, they call it so many things, and you don't need to label anything, you don't need to label anyone, because everything is energy. What they call ascension, it is closest to rediscovering senses you did not know anymore, that you were able to not just see, not just hear, not just touch, not just taste, the five senses, but also to perceive. Perceive. What's perception? It's very difficult, it's very mixed up, because we are lost in the conceptualization or labeling or labels about what emotions are, what it means to be intellectual, what it means to be detached, because attachments, oh my god, is such a bad thing, and the ego, ooh, the monster. The problem is that we are attached, in fact, to definitions that kind of trap the flow of energy within boxes. I want you to think about the closest visible, tangible version of energy that we can think of, and that is water. Okay, water is meant to flow. Water is meant to come from, from the top of a mountain. It's meant to be clean. It's meant to be in touch with the rest of nature, and it does provide life. It's a predominant aspect of the planet, just as it is the predominant aspect of a physical body. We are predominantly made of water. Think about what happens to water if you just take a little bit of it and put it inside of a container and just leave it there, stuck in there for years. It rottens. It stinks. In the best case scenario, it evaporates and then goes through its cycle and turns into, a cloud, and then it turns into rain and all of that. I don't want to sound scientific at all. I don't want to use any scientific definition. I don't want to refer to the work of of scientists and scholars right now. Because what I'm trying to do here is to have whoever is attracted by this to connect to themselves. Because it is by connecting to yourself, which is not your ego. Okay? It's not your ego, yourself. By connecting to yourself, you connect to the source. Therefore, you connect to the self of everyone else. Therefore, it's more like, it's not that you're disconnected right now. But, and this is what I was trying to once again translate into words. If you had to imagine what the ego actually is, I would describe it as a bunch of metal wire, you know, a big ball of super long, of a super long piece of, you know, of metal wire, all bunched up together. It recalls it a little bit the shape of the brain, you know, like almost like a labyrinth. And each and every bit of this wire represent what we call synapses, but also represent like a piece of concept. Okay? A piece of concept. This is stuff that we've recorded since when we manifested in the physical vessel. And it becomes more and more and more. And one concept is based on the next concept, and is based on the next concept, and is based on the next memory, and they're all intertwined, and they become a labyrinth, and it's so complex to understand where it begins and where it ends, to understand what's real and what's not real. But it's all real because it's all part of the personal experience. That constitutes the core of what we call ego. The thinking mind is educated to disregard the other aspects of the language of the being that we are. And I do not say the body, I do not say the soul. It's nonsensical. It's nonsensical. Why? Because it's almost like we've got the full picture, we've got it completely and fully, and we start dissecting it in order to understand it better. But what we want to come to eventually is this feeling of wholeness. Or even better, we want to come to the wholeness. So, I want you to understand the ego, this bunch of wire, bunch of metal wire in which every little section is a teeny weeny concept that is intersecated to with the next concept, and so on and so forth. That is why we say it is an illusion. Because the thinking mind that discards all the other aspects of the language of the being identifies with what it has learned. And so we tend to say, I am whatever you've learned. So if you've learned to be powerless because of your relationship with your caretakers when you were a child. You created, of course without knowing it, but a whole series of concepts of what you've learned you are, and what you've learned you did, and your story. And because the not knowing with the limited mind is so terrifying for the limited mind itself, we tend to adapt to this false limited concept that is created by the learned experiences. Is there something wrong about that? Not necessarily. That is part of the human experience, or that is part of the physical experience. I don't want to only call it human. This is part of the density of the physical experience. What is the transition in which we find ourselves right now is the experience, or better, the awareness, the new consciousness, being, conscious. We are becoming conscious that we are not one-dimensional, which is the dimension of being completely identified with this bunch of wire, which is the ego. We're multidimensional. Okay. And here, it is necessary to challenge some of the most famous and most eradicated misconceptions of the entire history of humanity. One of these misconceptions is that the ego is useless, the ego is evil, and the body is a trap that keeps the soul in cage in this horrible place that is, the physical experience, the physical body. And it's not worth it of attention or love or consideration. We need to destroy it and get out of it. I'm happy enough to say that the current times have seen a renaissance of the body. But I'm talking, for example, to those who have been in a deep depression, or have been experiencing repeated emotional abuse, and have had even suicidal thoughts, for example. Those that have been so depressed they couldn't even get up and take a shower, they couldn't even get themselves to eat something, and then some strength from within them, after suffering so much, made them make a decision and begin to take care of themselves, starting from where they were in and where they were at. And this is, for example, how my journey of recovery and ultimately of awakening as well had to begin. I had to go down to be able to reconnect and re-emerge. In such separation I was. I couldn't even find where my tears were coming from, because it was so much. And that was, of course, like very hard to deal with, to say the least. To say the least. But obviously, it's been my blessing. There is no breakthrough if you don't have a breakdown. And why? Because this ego, this bunch of experiences, is sedimented, is almost like it solidifies and doesn't allow for the light that is you to shine through and recognize the existing connection to source. And this light pervades every cell of your body. You're not as solid as you believe, because the closer you go, the closer you get to the core of a cell, of an atom, and keep zooming in and zooming in and zooming in, and when you get there, you find that what you're made of is actually this nothingness that is energy and is always moving. So how do we manifest in this physical form if we are light and energy? Even our bodies are light and energy. That is not for words. That is not for the ego to be grasped. That is a truth that you can feel, visualize, perceive, and just know in your heart. But ultimately is what we call unconditional love. So the breakdown of this mental structure which we identify with is necessary to open the door for the light of our true self. And then becoming your true self, it means stop identifying, but recognizing that light that you are immersed in, you are made of, and you interact with on a regular basis. Every solid form is a different arrangement of this energy. Everything is therefore connected. You cannot be of service to others if you are unable to love yourself. And by loving yourself, it doesn't mean becoming like all egotistical, completely focused on just your own, what you believe being advantage. That is not self-love. That is ego attachment. And here I want to say something. The ego does have a role. And it's a very important role, because without the ego, it would be literally impossible for the light we are to have the experience in the physical dimension that we're having. The ego is a guardian. Is the guardian that keeps the light you are safe. And it has to learn that the thinking mind that is at one with the concept of the ego has a power that is the power of focusing the creative energy on one goal. So the creative energy is constantly you, in nature, in creation, creative energy, in creation, in love. It's constantly there, and it doesn't go anywhere, because that's what source is. Not is made of, is. That's why we say love is. Sorry. I hit my elbow. Part of the physical experience. But it's overly simplifying. This is why I talk about translation when channelers are channeling, as I am doing. It is a translation because the message is. But in the physical experience, we have the variety and diversification of the circumstances. Each and every one of them contains, at its core, the same teaching, if we want to call it teaching. Yet, that's exactly what we need in order to be able to get there. Because we are experiencing an energetic shift. This planet and its inhabitants are changing skin. Our energy is elevating. Our physical body is transforming. And so the old, or what we called old, or the I want to say fear-based consciousness, which is the consciousness of not knowing and therefore attaching to what we know so bad that we're willing to do anything to save that little bit we know. That is fear. And here I'm saying, like, attachment is an aspect of the ego, is an aspect of how this system of memory, archiviation and recognition of concepts and ideas, which become ultimately our life story, is functioning. You know, so the ego has this function, and the attachments of the ego may be serving your physical incarnated experience for a stretch of time. What we experience as linear time. The experience is being experienced by the self. The ego is the container that makes this experience perceived as real. And then it gets more complicated because this experience is not just the individual experience, but it's also a collective experience. So we have a common experience of the consciousness, of the soul, of the source manifesting itself in the human race. And each and every one of the particles of this human race is a human being in and of itself, having a whole complete experience. The ultimate goal is integration. Integration of the self. So we have to learn how to overcome the fragmentation, which is by definition a byproduct of the identification with the ego. And this has to happen first with our own self, and then the second step will be in the collective experience, learning to overcome the fragmentation with others, with the experiences of others. So, being of service to others requires first inner work. The work of self-integration. Self-integration means integrating every aspect of you under the umbrella of love. So you have to start where you're at. And in order to start where you're at, you have to recognize where you're at. How do you recognize where you're at? By allowing, acknowledging, and experiencing your emotions. And here is another huge, enormous misconception. Being emotional is the source of all evil. Once again, like the ego. It's bad because if you're emotional, you're reactive. And if you're reactive, then you attack others and this and that. That is true. But it stems from something. Emotions are not negative in and of themselves. Emotions are your compass. They tell you where you're at in truth. Not what you process with your thinking mind out there. Oh, where am I? Where am I at right now? Oh, I'm sitting on a chair in this room and I'm staring at the wall. That's not where you're at. Where you're at is how you feel. And once again, feelings and emotions are not necessarily the same thing. I'm gonna conclude here for this week's chapter. And I want to thank you for staying with me until the end. And I encourage you to ask questions, because questions are going to be very helpful for me to truly become of service. I wish you a beautiful week, and I see you next time. Thank you. Bye.